Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when one of Britain's most famously guarded actors walks onto a daytime panel show expecting a polite chat, only to find himself staring down a question that hits at the heart of modern humanity? That was the scene on Loose Women when Hugh Grant sat across from Denise Welch to debate a topic that set the studio buzzing before cameras even rolled. Will AI therapists replace real therapists within the next decade? From the moment the segment opened, the energy shifted. Hugh came in with that dry calm he's known for, almost amused by the idea that an algorithm could understand the human heart better than a trained counselor. Denise wasn't having it. To her, technology isn't just catching up, it's learning, adapting, and becoming a real threat to the emotional labor humans have always provided. The audience leaned in as both sides prepared to defend something bigger than tech. Hugh framed it as a question of soul and connection. Denise framed it as evolution and accessibility. And in those first few seconds, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to be a light debate. This was going to get personal.
The debate didn't start with raised voices or sharp lines. It began the way many daytime conversations do, with a bit of warmth, some humor, and the illusion that everyone on the sofa shared the same wavelength. Hugh Grant arrived looking relaxed in that slightly rumpled way he's perfected over the years. He smiled politely, waved to the audience, and settled into his seat like he expected a nice, gentle segment about films or charity work. Denise Welch greeted him with a wide grin, and for a moment the room felt light. The panel eased in with small talk. Hugh mentioned he'd been avoiding technology more lately, joking that his phone had become a pocket-sized stalker. The audience laughed, and Denise chimed in, saying she wished she could ditch her phone, but couldn't because her kids expected instant replies. Hugh raised his eyebrows at that, amused. It was all pleasant, the kind of moment where everyone seems to agree that life is a bit ridiculous and tech has made it even more so. Then the producers shifted the conversation toward the debate topic. Denise leaned back, crossed her arms, and gave Hugh a curious look, as if trying to guess where he stood before he said a word. Hugh straightened slightly. He wasn't defensive, just alert. The tone changed, but stayed polite. Denise opened with a story about a friend who couldn't afford traditional therapy but found real comfort using an AI mental health app that checked in daily and offered quick support. She spoke with empathy, not provocation. Hugh nodded as she talked, listening with genuine interest. He didn't interrupt, he didn't roll his eyes. He gave her the space to make her case, and it made the room feel grounded. When it was Hugh's turn, he started gently. He talked about the importance of being understood by another human being, someone who can read a sigh or the look in your eyes without needing code to interpret it. He wasn't attacking the idea of AI therapy. He was trying to explain why people still crave human connection. Denise agreed with that part. She even admitted that no app could replace a comforting hand or an understanding nod. But she countered by mentioning long wait lists, high costs, and the sheer number of people who slip through the cracks while trying to get help. They found surprising common ground. Neither believed mental health support should be limited to those who can afford it. Neither believed technology was a villain. Hugh even joked that he'd love an AI version of himself to handle stressful interviews. Denise laughed and told him the AI might be easier to deal with. The audience cracked up, and Hugh shook his head. For a moment, it felt like the debate might stay soft. There was respect on both sides. Hugh appreciated Denise's concern for accessibility. Denise appreciated Hugh's emphasis on emotional nuance. They nodded along with each other, traded smiles, and created the kind of moment daytime television producers love. Nobody watching would have predicted how sharply the tone would shift later. But underneath the friendly banter, you could feel the tension forming. It wasn't obvious yet. It was just a subtle shift in posture, a slight edge in Denise's voice when she spoke about people being dismissed by the healthcare system, and a quiet firmness in Hugh's tone whenever he mentioned human empathy. They weren't clashing yet. They were circling the heart of the question, warming up like athletes before the real match begins. The studio energy stayed warm, but the pressure was building. Both of them cared about the issue more than they let on, And as the segment eased toward the next beat, the audience could tell they were about to move from polite agreement to something much sharper. The tone shifted the moment Denise leaned forward and asked Hugh a sharper question. It wasn't hostile, but it carried a weight that changed the room. She asked whether his concerns about AI therapy came from a place of privilege. The audience reacted with a soft ripple, the kind that means people are paying attention. Hugh paused. His expression didn't harden, but his eyes became more focused. He answered calmly, saying he wasn't dismissing AI tools. He simply believed they shouldn't be treated as full replacements for trained professionals. He emphasized that mental health struggles often need more than fast answers. Denise didn't disagree with that part, but she pushed back harder this time. She said too many people are stuck on wait lists, and technology might be the only help they get for months or even years. She invited Hugh to imagine being in that position. Hugh nodded, but he didn't let the point pass. He said quick access doesn't automatically mean effective support. He brought up concerns about data privacy, emotional misinterpretation, and the risk of people relying on something that doesn't truly understand them. Denise countered immediately. She pointed out that many traditional systems fail too, and at least technology can improve if the right people invest in it. A few audience members clapped. Hugh shifted in his seat. He wasn't flustered, but you could tell he felt the pressure. He said the moment society starts treating emotional well-being like a product, we risk losing the very thing therapy is built on: trust. Denise raised her voice slightly, not yelling, but sounding more fired up. She said trust doesn't matter much to someone who can't get any help at all. She gave examples of young people using AI apps to get through rough nights when no counselor was available. Her tone grew more personal, and the room leaned toward her. Hugh respected her passion, but he didn't back down. He said he worried the push to normalize AI therapists was more about cutting costs than helping people. He questioned whether big companies would prioritize compassion over profit. Denise shot back that technology could expand access, especially for people who feel intimidated or judged in traditional settings. She said some folks might actually open up more to a non-human presence. The tension grew thick enough that the co-hosts exchanged quick glances, the kind that signaled producers in the control room were starting to talk into their earpieces. But neither Hugh nor Denise slowed down. Hugh raised a point about nuance. He said a human therapist can tell when someone says, "I'm fine," but really means, "I'm not okay at all." He doubted an algorithm could consistently catch that. Denise jumped on the word algorithm, saying humans also miss subtle signs. She talked about people who felt dismissed, misunderstood, or even judged in therapy sessions. Hugh held his ground. He said replacing humans entirely was dangerous, and he didn't want a future where people relied on chat windows during their worst moments. Denise answered by saying the future was coming whether people liked it or not, and the real question was whether society would shape it responsibly or keep pretending it wasn't happening. The audience murmured again. They were both speaking louder now, but neither was disrespectful. They cared, and that passion made the exchange sharper. Hugh said people deserve the warmth of a real voice and presence. Denise replied that people also deserve immediate help, even if it comes from a screen at 2 in the morning. They weren't talking past each other, they were colliding. By the time the hosts tried to ease the tension with a light remark, Hugh and Denise were locked into the debate. Their earlier smiles had faded, replaced by intensity. The friendly tone from the first segment was gone. They weren't opponents in a fight, but they were no longer strolling around the topic. They had stepped right into the center of it, and neither looked ready to soften their stance. The heat was rising, and the viewers could feel it. The polite conversation had reached its limit. Now the real clash was underway. The moment that shifted everything came when Denise took a breath, steadied herself, and said something that carried more weight than any argument so far. She told Hugh she didn't just believe in AI therapy because she liked technology. She believed in it because someone close to her might still be alive if immediate support had been available. The room went silent so fast it felt like the air had vanished. Hugh didn't interrupt. His expression softened, but he didn't speak. Denise kept going, her voice lower than before. She explained how that person had tried to get help, how they'd been placed on a long waiting list and given a brochure instead of a real human to talk to. She said if there had been any kind of responsive system, even one run by artificial intelligence, it might have kept them afloat for one more night. She wasn't crying, but the pain behind her words was visible. The co-hosts shifted in their chairs. The audience leaned forward. Hugh's discomfort wasn't defensive anymore. It was empathetic, the kind that pulls a person inward. But he still believed in what he'd been arguing, and that made his silence heavier. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. He thanked Denise for sharing what she had, and he told her losing someone in that way was unimaginable. But he also said he didn't want society to use tragedy as an excuse to outsource human care. Denise didn't take offense. She listened, but her eyes showed frustration. She said that for many people, care doesn't exist in a human form. She said long wait times aren't a minor problem, they're the crisis no one wants to talk about. She insisted AI wasn't about replacing therapists, it was about survival for people who can't get help fast enough. Hugh nodded, but his reply carried its own intensity. He said he feared we were normalizing the idea that a machine could replace a feeling human presence. He admitted that wait lists were unacceptable, but he asked whether the solution should be technology or the will to fix the failing human system. Denise answered quickly, saying both approaches could coexist. She said his fear of AI was preventing a clear look at the lives it could save, right now. The audience burst into scattered applause. Hugh held up his hands gently, not defensive but firm. He said he wasn't afraid. He simply believed deeply in the irreplaceable nature of human empathy. Then he asked her a direct question. Do you truly believe an AI can understand someone the way a trained therapist can? The way he said it carried no malice, but it touched a nerve. Denise straightened. She said no machine could ever fully understand a person, but then she hit back harder. She said plenty of trained therapists don't fully understand their patients either. She said people fall through the cracks, even with human professionals. She said AI wouldn't replace humans, but it could catch the people the system keeps dropping. The applause this time was louder. Hugh leaned back slightly, absorbing her words. He didn't agree, but he respected her conviction. He said emotional nuance was too fragile to entrust to a system built on patterns and predictions. He worried that once AI proves good enough, institutions will use it as an excuse to reduce access to real professionals. Denise replied that dismissing AI out of fear meant ignoring millions who need help immediately. Her tone wasn't sharp now. It was pleading. Hugh's voice tightened as he responded. He said he wasn't dismissing it. He said he wanted technology to support therapists, not become therapists. Denise countered that for many people there are no therapists to support. She said AI could be a bridge to human care, not a replacement for it. The studio audience murmured again, feeling the emotional pull on both sides. The tension reached its highest point not with anger, but with raw honesty. Hugh cared deeply about keeping human connection at the center of mental health. Denise cared deeply about reaching those who have no support at all. Their clash wasn't about winning the argument anymore. It was about whose fear carried more urgency, his fear of losing humanity or her fear of losing more lives. The host finally stepped in, sensing the energy had reached its peak. But even as the conversation moved forward, the emotional charge lingered. Hugh and Denise weren't just debating technology anymore. They were revealing the heart of what mental health really means in a modern world. And the audience could feel that every word mattered.
The moment everything snapped came about 10 minutes later, when one of the co-hosts brought up a recent study showing that AI therapy apps had already reduced wait times in several countries. Denise used that as fuel. She said it was proof the future had already begun. Hugh, who had been calm during the emotional portions, pushed back harder than at any point before. His voice didn't rise, but the firmness behind it sharpened the air. He said numbers could look impressive without telling the whole story. He pointed out that many users of those apps still reported feeling unseen, misunderstood, or guided by generic advice. He said mental health wasn't a line at the supermarket, and he didn't trust a world where efficient replaced effective. Denise fired right back, saying the people surveyed weren't comparing AI to perfect therapy. They were comparing it to no therapy at all. For them, generic was better than silence. Hugh exhaled slowly. His patience thinned, not because he was angry, but because he felt the conversation drifting toward what he feared most, normalization. He said if AI therapy became the norm, governments and institutions would have every excuse to cut funding for real therapists. It always happens this way, he said. When something cheaper comes along, it replaces what was human. Denise sat forward, her posture tense now. She said that argument assumed the public would accept emotional care from a machine without demanding human options too. She accused him of underestimating people. Hugh countered that the same public had already allowed customer service, news, and basic human interaction to be outsourced to algorithms. We're sleepwalking into a world where human connection is optional, he said. The audience reacted noticeably to that line. Some clapped, others groaned. The divide in the room mirrored the divide at the table. Then came the moment that lit the fuse. Denise looked at him and asked him if he had ever personally experienced long-term mental health struggles. Hugh paused. It wasn't an insult, but it was personal. He said yes, of course he had, and he didn't appreciate the implication that his concerns were academic. Denise shook her head quickly, clarifying she wasn't questioning his compassion, but she did question whether he understood the despair of someone who had nowhere to turn. He took a beat before replying. He said he didn't need to be in that exact position to understand that people deserved human care. She shot back that if perfection was the requirement, most people would keep suffering indefinitely. It was the sharpest exchange of the day. One co-host tried to soften things by asking Hugh whether he believed AI had any place in mental health at all. He said it did, as a supportive tool, not a replacement. Denise pressed him again, asking how he defined supportive. If a person got through a panic attack because of an AI intervention, wasn't that therapy? If a teenager learned grounding techniques from a digital program and avoided self-harm, wasn't that real help? Hugh answered carefully, but with clear resistance. He said those interventions mattered, but they shouldn't be mistaken for the deep work a therapist provides. Denise interrupted gently but firmly. She said deep work is great, but people need immediate work first, and AI could do that without replacing anything. Hugh took a longer breath this time. His frustration wasn't directed at Denise, but at the world he saw taking shape. He said once AI proves it can handle service-level issues, companies and policymakers will push it deeper because it's cheaper, faster, and easier to scale. Once they can automate empathy, they'll try. The studio fell quiet again. Denise's reply was the breaking point. She said if the choice was between imperfect help from a machine and no help from a system stretched thin, she'd choose the machine. She said she'd rather save lives than preserve ideals. Hugh leaned back, a small shake of his head giving away what he didn't say out loud. Ideals to him were what protected humanity from becoming disposable. That quiet disagreement was louder than any shout. For the first time in the conversation, they realized they weren't just debating technology, they were debating the future of what it means to care for each other. And neither one was ready to back down.
When the segment wound down, the studio felt different from how it began. The arguments had stretched well beyond statistics and predictions. They touched something fragile in everyone watching. Hugh sat a little quieter now, his hands folded, the earlier edge softened. Denise wasn't fired up anymore either. She looked thoughtful, almost reflective, as if the debate had taken something out of her too. The moderator asked them both for a final takeaway. Hugh spoke first. He said he wasn't against innovation. He even admitted he admired the promise that AI could offer, especially for people who felt invisible. But he stressed again that humanity shouldn't drift into convenience without caution. He said mental health required presence, intuition, and soul, and he didn't want a future where institutions replaced too many of those things with lines of code. His voice wasn't combative now. It was honest, even a bit weary. He said people deserved real connection, not a simulated version of it. Denise nodded as she listened. When it was her turn, she talked about the people who fall through the cracks of a system too overwhelmed to catch them. She said the world is changing, and technology isn't the enemy. She framed AI therapy not as a threat, but as an emergency exit for the people who can't afford to wait for real therapists or are too scared to reach out to one. She said she wasn't asking for machines to replace humans. She was asking for every available tool to keep people alive and stable long enough to eventually get to a human. The two of them traded small, tired smiles, the kind that say the disagreement is real, but so is the respect. The audience exhaled with them. No one felt like either side had won. Instead, it felt like something deeper had been uncovered, something the show hadn't planned, but couldn't avoid once it surfaced. The closing music started, and the camera panned out, catching Hugh and Denise still in quiet conversation. They weren't sparring any longer. They were two people who cared about the same thing in different ways. One feared losing human warmth to efficiency. The other feared losing more people to isolation and delay. Both fears were real, both mattered, and everyone watching could feel that tension spill past the studio walls, into living rooms, workplaces, and late-night conversations. As the episode ended, the debate didn't feel settled. It felt necessary, and it left viewers with a question bigger than the show itself. In a world moving faster every year, how do we protect the human heart without leaving anyone behind? If you enjoyed this moment, stay tuned for more intense debates, honest conversations, and unexpected clashes that challenge how we think about the world around us.